with regards to difficulty, well, the only thing more difficult than contending forthrightly with existence is failing to do so. I'm not suggesting for a moment that this isn't difficult. I mean, part of what the Western religious tradition has done, and religious traditions in general, to some degree, is to try to provide people with support from what's divine in their incalculably difficult efforts to deal with the unknown, let's say, the unknowable. You know, that if you orient yourself ethically in the most fundamental sense, then in some sense you have the force of God on your side, and then maybe you can prevail despite the difficulty. And I think that's right. I think that's true. So, and you can ask yourself, I try to ask these questions seriously, you know, and I would also say that I've been driven to my religious beliefs, such as it is, by necessity, not by desire. What do you want to have on your side when you're contending with the unknowable future and its vagaries? How about truth? How about beauty? How about justice? You want allies? Those are powerful allies. That's what the university is supposed to be teaching young people. It's like, you need some allies, man.
Get on it.
Well, how about the pursuit of truth? Well, then the scientists have their say. And I would say on the economic front, well, how about the free trade between autonomous individuals, the free trade of goods of value between autonomous individuals? That's not such a bad thing to have on your side, these eternal verities. And then we could say, perhaps, that, well, there is a set of eternal verities, but they're all eternal verities, so they share something in common, some good in common. All good things share some good in common. Well, what is the good that they share in common? Well, for all intents and purposes, that's God. And you might say, well, I don't believe in that. It's like, well, I don't know what you mean. You don't believe there's any such thing as good? You don't believe there's any such thing as ultimate good? I'm not trying to make some ontological claim about an old man living in the sky, although I think that's a lot more sophisticated concept than people generally realize. That's not my point. My point is, you do have a belief system, whether you know it or not. It's a system of ethics. Whether you know it or not, there's either something at the bottom that unifies it, or it's not unified, which means you're aimless and hopeless and depressed and anxious and confused, because those are the only other options. And maybe you don't know what that unifying belief is, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. It just means you don't know what it is. And so I'm trying to puzzle out what it is. You know, I could give you a couple of examples, very, very briefly, because I won't. So I already mentioned the Genesis, the story in Genesis. It associates God with the force process that generates habitable order out of chaos and attributes that nature in some sense to human beings. In the next part of the story, in the story of Adam and Eve, God is what people walk with unself-consciously in the garden. So Adam doesn't, because he's now ashamed and he doesn't walk with God anymore. But so what is God? Well, that's what you walk with when you're unself-conscious. So that's an interesting idea. And then you have the God that manifests himself, let's say, in the story of Noah, and that's the intuition that hard times are coming and that you better get your house in order. And you think, well, does that lead you, that intuition? Well, certainly sometimes, if you have any sense, it's like, well, what's the nature of the intuition? Is that a spirit that animates you? Well, obviously, because there you are acting, and so you're acting out pattern. It's a spirit that animates you. And then there's the story of the Tower of Babel. What's God there? Well, God is that which you replace at your peril, because everything will come tumbling down. That's the Tower of Babel. It's like, well, is that true or not? You think about that for a week, especially in that light. You think, oh, definitely, if we put the wrong thing at the top, like Stalin, for example, then look out. And we've done that a bunch of times in the 20th century. I think, you know, Milton conceptualized Lucifer as something like the spirit of unbridled intellectual arrogance. It's something like Lucifer is the light bringer, and he is engaged in a conflict with God, attempting to replace the divine. And that's pretty explicit in the story. And I look at that and I think, oh, that's a poetic intuition of the battle between secular the secular intelligentsia and the religious structure. That's Milton's prodroma. And what he sees happening is the intellect has become so arrogant that it will attempt to replace the divine and rule over hell. I think, yeah, well, that's the Soviet Union, man. That's Maoist China. We know. We've got our theory. It's total. We've solved the problem and nothing's going to change. Fair enough. If you want to rule over hell and you think, well, these societies are successful, it's a pretty odd definition of success as far as I'm concerned. You want to be successful like China? You know, that's why it's true that man does not live by bread alone, you know. A wealthy slave, that's no life, man.